Welcome back. The president is inviting Vladimir Putin to the White House this fall as the White House today tries to clean up another controversy from President Trump's summit with Vladimir Putin earlier this week. A proposal to let Russian authorities interrogate Americans in exchange for letting Mueller's team sit in on questioning of 12 intelligence officers indicted for 2016 election hacking. President Trump said on Monday that it was a, quote, incredible offer. Yesterday, the White House didn't rule it out. But now the White House says, quote, it is a proposal that was made in sincerity by President Putin, but President Trump disagrees with it. The Kremlin critics that Putin wants, include a familiar face to many of our viewers, MSNBC analyst and former U.S. ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, also Bill Browder, an American-born British businessman. But Putin singled out Browder at that press conference, who's led a human rights campaign resulting in sanctions against the Kremlin. And now Vladimir Putin wants to get his hands on him. Bill Browder joins me now. Bill, I guess we should say Vladimir Putin has wanted to get his hands on you for quite some time. It's not just now. What do you think of the president inviting Putin to the White House this fall?
Well, I didn't think that Donald Trump should have given Putin the benefit of sitting on a stage with him in Helsinki, and I don't think that he should give him the benefit of a state visit to the United States. Vladimir Putin is a menace to the world. He's invaded Ukraine. He's shot down passenger planes with innocent people on them. He's killed innocent women and children in Syria. He's meddled with elections, spreading chemical weapons around the center of England. This guy is a global menace, and to invite him to Washington after sitting on a stage as equals in Helsinki is this enormous gift to Vladimir Putin that Vladimir Putin absolutely doesn't deserve.
Does it make you personally nervous that he's inviting him? After all, the White House said yesterday that they were considering allowing Putin and Russians to question you and some other American citizens.
Well, it doesn't make me particularly nervous, although my accent betrays it. 29 years ago, I emigrated to London. I'm a British citizen, and so it's not as if he has jurisdiction over me. And furthermore, to the extent that when I am in America, the United States is a rule of law country. The courts have power over the government, and I don't think that anything untoward would happen to me. But it does bother me that Vladimir Putin is getting all these free gifts of credibility when he should be contained, not flattered and engaged.
You said that you do live in Britain, so I guess the president should have been asking a different head of state if he really wanted to talk to you, Theresa May, although she probably wouldn't be so apt to give you to him, given what happened on her soil with the poisoning of the ex-Russian spy. But just talk to us a little bit about what sort of security measures you've put in place for yourself. Are you worried about your safety generally?
Well, the first thing I should point out is that although the world has seen Vladimir Putin's anger towards me in the last few days, this has been going on for 5 years. And so his anger is at a no different a level now than it was 5 years ago. He's very angry. He's been very angry. He's angry at me for the Magnitsky Act, and he wants to destroy me, to kill me, to arrest me. And he's been trying these things for a number of years. And so, yes, I do have many security measures in place. The most important security measure, though, is legal security. I only go to countries where governments will support me and not hand me over to Vladimir Putin.
That severely limits your travel, I would assume.
Well, not really. No, I mean, there are a number of like rule of law countries around the world.
Yeah, but if you go to a European country, they could put out an alert on Interpol.
Well, that happened to me about 6 weeks ago. I was in Madrid, Spain. Russia put out an Interpol arrest warrant. The Spanish police acted on it, arrested me, but 2 hours later I was released. And so I don't think that I would have been sent back to Russia from Madrid. But let's say I had been in I don't know, Dubai. I'm sure those guys would be happy to give Vladimir Putin a little gift.
You say Vladimir Putin is upset at you about the Magnitsky Act, which is all the sanctions that have been put on those close to Vladimir Putin over the years. Why is he also accusing you, though, of avoiding paying Russian tax debts and funneling money to the Clinton Foundation, or I'm sorry, Hillary Clinton's campaign? He's also even calling you a serial killer. Why?
Well, he basically they make up criminal accusations against their enemies. Serial killing, they call me a spy. They said that I stole $4.8 billion of IMF money, which was destined for Russia in 1998. They just throw this stuff out like candy against their enemies. They basically, in order to try to discredit people who are fighting corruption or fighting for human rights, they just try to criminalize them. It's a standard operating procedure. They do it with every single person who's a human rights activist. The more effective a human rights activist you are, the more of these allegations they throw out there. Thankfully, they don't stick in the West, but that is his modus operandi.
Why exactly is he so upset at you? Explain why the Magnitsky Act has gotten under his skin. After all, our viewers will know that act and find that familiar, because that's what the guise of what the Donald Trump Jr. meeting with the Russian lawyer was about in Trump Tower in 2016.
So it all comes back to the fundamental principle that Vladimir Putin is a very corrupt head of state, a kleptocrat. And what that means is he's stolen a lot of money from the Russian people through many, many different crimes and schemes. Some of those crimes and schemes required him to either take hostage or kill businessmen or people who stood in his way. And so as a result of this, he's done two things: committed a lot of crimes and accumulated a lot of money. And the money that he's accumulated sits in bank accounts in the West. And what the Magnitsky Act does is it says anybody who's involved in gross human rights abuses can have their money seized. And so it applies directly to that type of person, to the Vladimir Putin type of person who's committed crimes and has a lot of money. And in Vladimir Putin's case, he thinks, and he's not unrealistic in thinking this, that his offshore wealth is at risk because of actions that I've taken and because of he could potentially be sanctioned under the Magnitsky Act.
Bill Browder. Bill, thank you so much for being with us today. We do appreciate it.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.